Hey guys, tonight we're pedaling back to a time when bicycles were the iPhone of transportation, women's fashion was a literal death trap, and the roads were filled with Victorian people discovering that balancing on two wheels is harder than it looks. We're talking about the bicycle craze of the 1890s, a decade when suddenly everyone in America and Europe decided that what their lives were missing was a velocipede, some questionable knee-length bloomers, and the very real possibility of face planting into a dirt road at 12 miles per hour. This isn't the Tour de France. This isn't your leisurely bike ride to Starbucks. This is the 1890s, when bicycles had names like boneshakers for very good reasons, when doctors warned that cycling would cause everything from insanity to infertility, and when respectable women were told that riding bicycles would destroy their moral fibre along with their reproductive organs. But people did it anyway, because the bicycle represented freedom, modernity, and the chance to escape your parents' house without needing a horse. So before we mount up and wobble down a dirt road, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'm betting it's either 2 a.m. or you're avoiding something important. Either way, welcome. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe avoid thinking about how many Victorian people died doing what you consider a casual weekend activity. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was like when bicycles were invented and everyone lost their minds? How do you learn to ride when literally no one knows how to teach you? What did people wear when fashion designers hadn't figured out that maybe giant skirts and moving machinery don't mix? How fast could you actually go on a bicycle with terrible brakes and roads made of rocks and horse droppings? Could you survive the social scandal of being a woman who rides a bicycle? Would you risk the moral panic, the medical warnings, and the very real chance of dying because your skirt got caught in the chain? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1895. You're standing in front of a bicycle shop, looking at a gleaming safety bicycle that costs 3 months of your wages. You don't know how to ride it. Nobody you know knows how to ride it. The street is full of horse manure and pedestrians who will judge you. Your corset is so tight you can barely breathe, let alone pedal. And you're about to discover that safety bicycle is a relative term. Good luck. Chapter 1. Before the craze. The Bone Shaker era. Before the 1890 seconds bicycle boom, there were earlier, more terrifying versions of the bicycle. The velocipede, affectionately nicknamed the Bone Shaker, was introduced in the 1860 seconds. It had wooden wheels with iron tyres and no suspension whatsoever. Riding one over cobblestones was exactly what it sounds like. Your bones were shaken, your teeth rattled, and your spine questioned its life choices. Then came the penny farthing, with its enormous front wheel and tiny back wheel, which was great for going fast, and terrible for not dying, when you hit a bump and went flying over the handlebars, in what was called taking a header. Let's start with the velocipede, because understanding how terrible early bicycles were makes you appreciate why the 1890 seconds bicycle craze was actually a craze, and not just a collective death wish. The velocipede appeared in France in the 1860 seconds and quickly spread to America and Britain. It looked like a bicycle, 2 wheels, pedals, a frame, but it was built like a medieval torture device. The wheels were made of wood with iron bands around them, no rubber, no pneumatic tyres, just hard wood and harder iron making contact with stone streets. Riding a velocipede over cobblestones, which is what most city streets were made of, was an experience that your entire skeleton participated in. Every bump transmitted directly through the wooden wheels, through the rigid frame, through the seat, and into your pelvis and spine. Your teeth clattered together. Your vision blurred from the vibration. Your internal organs rearranged themselves. People who rode velocipedes regularly reported numbness in their hands and backside from the constant jarring. The nickname Bone Shaker was not hyperbole. It was accurate medical description. The velocipede also had pedals attached directly to the front wheel, which meant your pedaling speed directly controlled your wheel speed. Want to go faster? Pedal faster, which is exhausting. Want to go slower? Stop pedaling, except there are no brakes. Or rather, the brake is a leather pad you press against the front wheel with a lever, and it works about 40% of the time. The other 60% of the time, you're just hoping friction and gravity work in your favor. They don't always. Then someone had a brilliant idea. Make the front wheel absolutely enormous. Thus was born the penny farthing, also called the high wheel bicycle or the ordinary. The name comes from British coins, the penny being large and the farthing being tiny, just like the wheels. The front wheel could be 5 feet in diameter. The back wheel might be 18 inches. You sat on a seat positioned directly over the front wheel, about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. Getting on required a small ladder, or running alongside and vaulting into the seat like you're mounting a very tall, very unstable horse. The penny farthing could go fast because the large wheel covered more ground per pedal rotation. A skilled rider could reach 25 miles per hour, which was genuinely impressive in the 1,870 seconds and 1,880 seconds. The problem was stopping, turning, and not dying. The center of gravity was high and forward. Hit a bump, rock, pothole, or frankly anything unexpected, and you'd pivot forward over the handlebars in what riders called taking a header. You'd fall 5 feet headfirst onto cobblestones or dirt roads. People died this way regularly. Broken bones were common. Head injuries were expected. The penny farthing was also difficult to mount and dismount. You couldn't just stop and step off. You had to slow down, lean back, and sort of slide off the back while hoping the bike didn't fall on you. Getting on required either a running mount sprinting alongside the bike, stepping on a peg, and swinging into the seat, or using a mounting step. Women couldn't ride penny farthings at all because Victorian skirts made mounting impossible, and also because the social scandal of a woman sitting 5 feet in the air with her legs spread would have caused mass hysteria. Penny farthing riders were almost exclusively young men who were physically fit, financially comfortable enough to afford an expensive and impractical machine, and willing to risk death for the thrill of going fast. They formed clubs, organized races, and developed a culture around high-wheel cycling. They were the extreme sports enthusiasts of the Victorian era, admired, considered slightly insane, and tolerated because they weren't hurting anyone except themselves. Both the bone shaker and the penny farthing were expensive. A good velocipede cost $75 100 inches the 1,860 seconds, which was several months' wages for a working person. A penny farthing was similarly expensive. These were toys for the affluent, status symbols that demonstrated you had disposable income and a questionable relationship with self-preservation. The number of riders was limited by cost, difficulty, and danger. The technology improved incrementally. Solid rubber tires replaced iron bands, which helped marginally with the bone-shaking problem. Ball bearings improved efficiency. Lighter materials made bikes easier to control. But the fundamental problems remained. These bicycles were hard to ride, dangerous, inaccessible to most people, and absolutely impossible for women in standard Victorian clothing. This is the context for the 1,890 seconds bicycle craze. For 30 years, bicycles had been expensive, dangerous, difficult, and exclusive. They were sporting equipment for adventurous young men, not practical transportation for normal people. When the safety bicycle appeared in 1885 and became widely available by the 1890 seconds, it was revolutionary, specifically because it solved all these problems. You could get on and off easily. You could ride it without specialized training. Women could ride it. It was safer, cheaper, more practical, and suddenly accessible to the middle class. The bicycle craze of the 1890 seconds was really a safe bicycle craze. People weren't suddenly interested in bicycles. Bicycles had existed for decades. People were suddenly interested in bicycles they could ride without dying. That's the innovation. That's what changed everything. The bone shakers and penny farthings paved the way, but they also demonstrated everything a bicycle shouldn't be. The safety bicycle learned from those failures and created something people actually wanted to ride. And once people could ride bicycles safely, or relatively safely, because 1890 seconds safety is not modern safety, they couldn't get enough of them. The bone shaker era was over. The age of practical cycling had begun. Chapter 2. The safety bicycle arrives and changes everything. In 1885, the Rover safety bicycle was introduced, and it revolutionized everything. Unlike the penny farthing death trap, the safety bicycle had two wheels of equal size, a chain drive, and pneumatic tires filled with air instead of solid rubber. You could actually get on and off without a ladder. You could stop without planning your funeral. It was still dangerous by modern standards, but compared to what came before, it was a miracle. By the 1890 seconds, manufacturers were mass-producing these bikes. Prices were dropping, and suddenly the bicycle went from expensive toy to accessible transportation. The craze was about to begin. The Rover safety bicycle, designed by John Kemp Starley in England, solved the fundamental problems that made earlier bicycles impractical. The two wheels were roughly the same size, usually 26 to 30 inches in diameter. The rider sat between the wheels rather than over the front wheel, which meant the center of gravity was low and stable. The pedals connected to the rear wheel via a chain drive, which meant you could generate power efficiently without being perched precariously over the front wheel. This design seems obvious in retrospect, but in 1885 it was revolutionary. For the first time, a bicycle was stable enough that normal people could learn to ride it. You didn't need exceptional balance or athletic ability. You didn't need to be young and male. You just needed to practice for a few hours until you got the hang of it. The safety bicycle democratized cycling in a way the penny farthing never could. The other crucial innovation was pneumatic tires, developed by John Boyd Dunlop in 1888. Before pneumatic tires, bicycle wheels used solid rubber tires, which were better than iron bands but still transmitted every road imperfection directly to the rider. Dunlop's invention, a rubber tire filled with air, provided shock absorption. The air cushion absorbed bumps and smoothed the ride dramatically. Suddenly cycling was comfortable, or at least significantly less uncomfortable. The combination of stable design and pneumatic tires made the safety bicycle genuinely practical. You could ride reasonable distances without destroying your body. You could commute to work without arriving bruised and exhausted. You could use a bicycle for transportation, not just sport or recreation. This was transformative. Manufacturers recognized the market potential immediately. In the late 1880 seconds and early 1890 seconds, bicycle manufacturing exploded. American companies like Columbia, Rambler, and Pierce began producing safety bicycles in large quantities. British companies like Raleigh and Humber did the same. Competition increased, which drove innovation and lowered prices. A bicycle that cost $150 in 1890 might cost $100 by 1893 and $75 by 1895. Still expensive, but increasingly accessible to middle-class buyers. The safety bicycle also had features that made it user-friendly. Brakes actually worked, usually a rod-activated brake that pressed against the front wheel rim, or later a coaster brake activated by pedaling backward. Gears were introduced, allowing riders to adjust resistance and speed. Adjustable seats meant bicycles could be customized to different heights. Mudguards kept road spray off the rider. Bells warned pedestrians. These weren't just bicycles, they were refined, thought-out machines designed for real-world use. The design became standardized quickly. By 1892, most safety bicycles looked similar. Diamond-shaped frame, chain drive, 2 equal wheels, pneumatic tires. This standardization meant parts became interchangeable and repairs became easier. A broken chain or damaged wheel could be replaced with standard parts available at any bicycle shop. The bicycle evolved from artisan-crafted custom machine to mass-produced consumer product. Women immediately recognized the potential of the safety bicycle. Unlike the penny farthing, which was impossible to ride in a skirt, the safety bicycle was manageable. Women could mount from the side, sit on the seat, and pedal while wearing modified clothing. Manufacturers started producing ladies' bicycles with dropped top tubes, a frame design that allowed women to mount without lifting their legs over the frame. These bicycles sold extremely well, opening cycling to half the population that had been previously excluded. The safety bicycle's arrival coincided with rising urbanization and suburban development. Cities were growing. Middle-class people were moving to suburbs. Streetcars existed but were crowded and had fixed routes. Horses were expensive to maintain. The safety bicycle provided personal transportation that was affordable, flexible, and faster than walking. It was perfect for the commuting class. Bicycle shops opened in every city and large town. These weren't just retail stores, they were repair shops, social gathering places, and centres of cycling culture. Shop owners taught customers how to ride. They hosted cycling clubs. They sold accessories, lamps for night riding, bells, repair kits, cyclometers to measure distance, and fashionable cycling clothes. The bicycle shop became a fixture of urban commercial life. The safety bicycle also enabled bicycle touring and sport. With a reliable, comfortable machine, people could ride 50 or 100 miles in a day. Touring cyclists explored countryside and visited neighbouring towns. Bicycle racing became a spectator sport with professional racers, sponsored teams, and purpose-built velodromes. The safety bicycle was versatile, equally suitable for commuting, recreation, sport, or adventure. By 1895, the safety bicycle had become ubiquitous in American and European cities. You saw them everywhere, businessmen riding to work, women riding to social engagements, young people riding for fun, delivery workers using them for commerce. The bicycle had gone from novelty to essential in less than a decade. It was the smartphone of the 1,890 seconds. Suddenly, everyone had one, and life without one seemed impossibly inconvenient. The safety bicycle didn't just change transportation, it changed society. It gave women unprecedented mobility and independence. It enabled courtship without chaperones. It built demand for better roads. It taught people mechanical skills. It created new industries and jobs. It demonstrated that technology could rapidly transform daily life in accessible, affordable ways. The penny farthing was a curiosity. The safety bicycle was a revolution, and the revolution was just beginning. Chapter 4. why everyone suddenly wanted a bicycle. The bicycle represented everything modern people in the 1,890 seconds were obsessed with: speed, independence, technology, and the chance to escape the watchful eyes of your parents or chaperone. For men, it was a faster, cheaper alternative to horses. For women, it was revolutionary. You could go places without male supervision, which was basically unheard of. Young people could court without chaperones hovering 3 feet away. The middle class could afford something that felt luxurious and modern. The bicycle became status symbol, freedom machine, and social revolution all rolled into 2 wheels. Let's start with speed, because speed was intoxicating in the 1,890 seconds. People were used to the pace of walking 3 miles per hour, or horses at a trot 8 miles per hour. The safety bicycle could easily reach 10-12 miles per hour, and skilled riders could hit 15-20 miles per hour. This doesn't sound impressive now, but in the 1,890 seconds, it was thrilling. You were moving faster under your own power than humans had ever moved before. The wind in your face, the landscape blurring past, the sensation of velocity, it was addictive. The bicycle made you feel modern, capable, and alive. For men, the bicycle solved practical problems. Horses were expensive. You had to feed them, stable them, groom them, and replace them when they died. A horse cost hundreds of dollars plus ongoing maintenance. A bicycle cost $100 once plus minimal maintenance. For middle-class men, clerks, salesmen, small business owners, the bicycle was affordable, personal transportation. You could commute to work faster than walking, door to door, unlike streetcars, and without the expense of horse ownership. The bicycle was rational economics, but it was more than practical. The bicycle was cool. It was modern technology that you controlled personally. You weren't just riding a horse someone else bred. You were operating a machine with gears, chains, pneumatic tires, ball bearings, cutting-edge technology in the 1,890 seconds. Owning a bicycle signaled that you were forward-thinking, that you embraced modernity, that you weren't stuck in the past. It was a status symbol that said, "I am a modern person living in a modern age." For women, the bicycle was revolutionary in ways men couldn't fully appreciate. Victorian society restricted women's mobility severely. Respectable women didn't travel alone. They needed male relatives or paid chaperones to accompany them. They couldn't go places freely. Every excursion required planning, permission, and supervision. This restricted work opportunities, educational opportunities, and social freedom. Women were effectively trapped by social convention. The bicycle changed that overnight. A woman on a bicycle could travel alone without scandal, with some scandal, but manageable scandal. She could ride to work, to friends' houses, to shops, to libraries. She could escape her home without asking permission or arranging supervision. The bicycle provided independence that Victorian women had never experienced. This was intoxicating and terrifying to the established social order. Frances Willard, the temperance leader and women's rights advocate, wrote an entire book about learning to ride a bicycle at age 53. She called the bicycle a freedom machine. She described the joy of riding alone, of going where she wanted without depending on men for transportation. Her book became a bestseller because it articulated what thousands of women were feeling. The bicycle was liberation on wheels. Young people loved bicycles for different reasons. Escape from adult supervision. Courting couples in the Victorian era were supposed to be chaperoned. An unmarried man and woman couldn't spend time alone together without scandal. Enter the bicycle. Suddenly young couples could ride together, ostensibly exercising but actually getting away from their families. They could have conversations without parents listening. They could hold hands while helping each other mount their bicycles. The bicycle created plausible deniability for unchaperoned courtship. Parents were not thrilled about this. Moral guardians fretted that bicycles would lead to improper relationships. They weren't entirely wrong. Bicycles did enable young people to meet and court with more freedom than previous generations had. This was precisely why young people loved bicycles. The bicycle was a technology that shifted power away from parents and toward young adults making their own choices. The bicycle also provided recreation in a period when recreation was limited. Most people worked 6 days a week. Sunday was for church. Entertainment was expensive or inaccessible. The bicycle provided cheap, healthy recreation that got you out of the city and into the countryside. You could ride to parks, riversides, or neighboring towns. You could explore. The bicycle turned Sunday afternoons into adventures. Cycling clubs formed around this recreational culture. These were social organizations that organized group rides, picnics, races, and tours. Joining a club meant instant social network. You met people, made friends, found potential spouses. The clubs were stratified by class and often by race and gender, but within those boundaries, they provided community. The bicycle club became the social hub for many middle-class people. The bicycle was also exercise, at a time when exercise culture was emerging. The late Victorian era saw growing interest in physical fitness, sports, and outdoor activities. The bicycle fit perfectly into this trend. It built leg strength and cardiovascular fitness. It got people outdoors. Doctors, at least the sensible ones, recognized that cycling was healthy exercise. Despite the moral panic, doctors were simultaneously spreading about bicycle face and other invented conditions. There was also a keeping up with the Joneses element. If your neighbors had bicycles, you wanted one too. If your co-workers cycled to work, you felt left behind riding the streetcar. The bicycle became a social expectation in certain middle-class circles. Not owning a bicycle marked you as old-fashioned or poor. People bought bicycles partly because everyone else was buying bicycles, and social pressure is a powerful motivator. The bicycle represented the future. The 1,890 seconds were a period of rapid technological change. Electric lights, telephones, streetcars, and bicycles all emerged around the same time. People were excited about technology and progress. The bicycle was tangible progress you could own and operate. It wasn't some distant industrial machinery or infrastructure project. It was personal technology that changed your daily life immediately. The bicycle made you feel like you were living in the future. All these factors combined, speed, independence, technology, social freedom, recreation, status, exercise, and modernity, created the perfect storm of demand. The bicycle craze wasn't accidental. It was the rational response to a technology that solved real problems and fulfilled real desires. People wanted bicycles because bicycles genuinely made their lives better in measurable ways. And once the craze started, it became self-reinforcing. More buyers meant more manufacturers, which meant better bicycles at lower prices, which meant more buyers. Bicycle infrastructure improved, better roads, more shops, cycling clubs, published maps and guides. The bicycle ecosystem developed rapidly, making cycling easier and more accessible, which drove more people to adopt bicycles. By 1895, the bicycle was everywhere, not because it was forced on people, but because people genuinely wanted it. The bicycle craze was real desire meeting real technology at exactly the right historical moment. And, for a brief, shining decade, the bicycle was king. Chapter 4. The Sticker Shock. bicycles were expensive. A decent safety bicycle in 1895 cost about $100, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that's 3 months' wages for an average worker. The equivalent today would be spending $12,000, $15,000 on a bike. For that price, you got a steel frame, pneumatic tires, a chain drive, and absolutely no guarantees that you wouldn't die using it. Wealthy people bought top-of-the-line models with fancy brand names. The middle class saved up for months or bought on installment plans. The poor watched from the sidelines and wondered what it was like to have disposable income. Let's put the cost in perspective. In 1895, the average American worker, factory worker, clerk, laborer earned about $400 500 per year. That's roughly $35.40 per month. A decent safety bicycle cost $100, which was 2.5 to 3 months of full wages. Not income after expenses. Full wages. If you wanted a bicycle, you were committing a significant portion of your annual income to it. For comparison, other costs in $1,895. A men's suit cost $10.15. A pair of shoes cost $2.03. Rent for a modest apartment was $10.15 per month. A week's groceries cost $3.05. A bicycle cost as much as 10 suits, 40 pairs of shoes, or 6 months' rent. It was a major purchase, comparable to buying a used car today. You didn't buy a bicycle on impulse. You planned, saved, and sacrificed. The price range varied widely. The absolute cheapest bicycles, often called catalogue bikes because they were sold through mail-order catalogues like Sears or Montgomery Ward, cost $50.75. These were basic models with solid rubber tires, heavy frames, and minimal features. They worked, but they weren't comfortable or durable. They were the economy option for people who wanted to cycle but had limited budgets. Mid-range bicycles, the sweet spot for most buyers, cost $75, 125. These had pneumatic tires, lighter frames, better components, and brand names like Columbia, Rambler, or Crescent. They were comfortable, reliable, and suitable for commuting or recreational riding. Most middle-class cyclists bought in this range, either saving up to pay cash or using installment plans. High-end bicycles cost $150 200 or more. These were top-of-the-line models with the latest technology, multiple gears, advanced braking systems, lightweight steel frames, fancy paint jobs, and prestige brand names. Wealthy cyclists bought these as status symbols. The bicycle equivalent of driving a luxury car, it said you had money and taste. Then there were custom-built bicycles for racing or touring, which could cost $250 300. These were hand-built by skilled craftsmen, using the finest materials and components. Professional racers rode these. Wealthy enthusiasts bought them. For most people, they were aspirational, something you'd love to own but could never afford. The high cost created a barrier to entry that excluded large portions of the population. Working-class people earning $300 400 per year simply couldn't afford a $100 bicycle. That was several months of income they needed for rent, food, and basic survival. Immigrants, minorities, and the poor were priced out of the bicycle craze almost entirely. The bicycle boom was a middle-class and wealthy phenomenon by economic necessity. Some people financed bicycles through installment plans. Manufacturers and shops offered pay-as-you-ride. Programs put $10 20 down, then pay $5 10 per month until the bicycle was paid off. This made bicycles accessible to people who couldn't save up $100 but could manage monthly payments. Of course, the installment plans included interest, so you ended up paying $120, 130, for a $100 bicycle. But if the alternative was not cycling at all, the extra cost was worth it. The installment system created its own anxieties. If you missed a payment, the shop could repossess your bicycle. You'd lose everything you'd paid plus the bicycle itself. People budgeted carefully to avoid default. The bicycle was valuable property worth protecting. Some people bought insurance for their bicycles in case of theft or damage, adding another ongoing expense. Used bicycles provided another option. The bicycle market developed a robust used market by the mid-1892. People who upgraded to newer models sold their old bicycles. People who gave up cycling sold their bicycles. You could buy a used bicycle for $30, 60, depending on condition. The used market made cycling accessible to more people, though used bicycles came with risks, hidden damage, worn components, no warranty. The cost wasn't just the bicycle itself. You needed accessories: a lamp for night riding, $2, 5, a bell, $0.50 one, a repair kit, $1, 3, a pump, $1, a cyclometer to measure distance, $3, 5, and appropriate clothing. Men needed knickerbockers, $3, 5, and cycling caps, $1. Women needed cycling skirts or bloomers, $5, 10, and split skirts, $8, 15. The total investment could easily reach $125, 150, once you accounted for everything needed to cycle properly. Maintenance costs were ongoing. Tires wore out and needed replacement, $5, 8 per tire. Chains broke, $2, 3 for replacement. Bearings needed repacking with grease, $1, 2. Brake pads wore down $0.50 one. Spokes broke $0.25 each. If you did your own maintenance, costs were manageable. If you paid a shop, maintenance added $10, 20 per year. Not huge, but not trivial for working class budgets. The cost paradox was that bicycles saved money compared to alternatives. A horse cost $100, 200 to purchase, plus $10, 20 per month in feed, stable rent, and care. $120, 240 annually. Over a few years, a bicycle was dramatically cheaper than horse ownership. Similarly, daily streetcar fares of $0.10 15 added up to $30, 50 per year. A bicycle paid for itself within 2 to 3 years compared to streetcar commuting. The bicycle was economically rational if you could afford the upfront cost. But that's the key. If you could afford the upfront cost. For people living paycheck to paycheck, saving $100 was impossible. The bicycle's long-term savings didn't help if you couldn't raise the initial capital. This created a class divide, where people who could afford bicycles saved money on transportation, while people who couldn't afford bicycles paid more for streetcars or walked. The bicycle amplified existing economic advantages. Manufacturers tried to address the cost barrier by continuously improving manufacturing efficiency. Mass production, standardized parts, and competition drove prices down throughout the 1,890 seconds. A bicycle that cost $150 in 1890 might cost $75 by 1898. The declining prices made bicycles accessible to more people, expanding the market. By the late 1,890 seconds, decent bicycles could be had for $50 60, bringing them within reach of skilled workers and lower middle-class buyers. Still, the bicycle remained a significant purchase. People treated their bicycles as valuable property. They locked them, bicycle theft was common. They maintained them carefully. They sometimes named them. The bicycle was a major investment that represented months of saving and sacrifice. Losing or damaging a bicycle was a genuine financial disaster. The cost barrier meant the bicycle craze was never truly universal. It was a middle-class and wealthy phenomenon. The poor couldn't afford to participate. This shaped cycling culture clubs were middle-class social organizations. Cycling fashion was middle-class fashion, and cycling advocacy reflected middle-class concerns like road improvement. The bicycle craze transformed society, but only for those who could afford the price of admission. And that price, in 1895, was steep. Chapter 5. Learning to ride. Nobody knew how to ride a bicycle because bicycles were brand new. There were no instruction manuals, no YouTube tutorials, no training wheels. You basically bought an expensive metal contraption, stared at it, and hoped physics would be on your side. Some people hired bicycle instructors, yes, that was a job who would hold the bike steady while you wobbled and screamed. Others learned in empty fields or quiet streets, falling repeatedly until something clicked. The fall-to-success ratio was humiliating. People got bruises, sprains, broken bones, and occasionally died learning to do something children now learn at age 5. Let's start with the fundamental problem. Balancing on two wheels is not intuitive. Humans are designed to walk on two legs, not balance on two wheels. The physics of bicycle balance, where forward momentum creates gyroscopic stability, is counterintuitive. You have to be moving to stay upright, which means you can't learn balance while stationary. You have to commit to movement while not knowing if you'll immediately fall. It's a catch-22 that every new cyclist had to overcome. Most people started their learning process the same way. They stood next to their new bicycle, gripped the handlebars, and tried to mount. This was harder than it looked. You had to throw your leg over the frame, settle onto the seat, find the pedals with your feet, and start pedaling before you tipped over, all while the bicycle was unstable and trying to fall sideways. The first attempts usually ended with the bicycle falling over with you still on it, or you hopping awkwardly on one foot while the bicycle dragged you sideways. Bicycle riding schools opened in major cities by the mid-1890s. These were dedicated facilities, often indoor rinks with smooth floors where instructors taught people to ride. You paid $1.03 for a lesson or $5.10 for a series of lessons. The instructor, usually an experienced cyclist, would hold your bicycle steady while you practiced mounting, pedaling, and steering. They'd run alongside you, holding the seat or handlebars, keeping you upright while you got a feel for the motion. The instructor would gradually release their grip, letting you balance independently for a few seconds before catching you again. You didn't know when they'd let go, which was intentional if you knew. You'd panic. The goal was to get you balancing without realizing it. Eventually, you'd pedal a few yards independently, realize you were riding, panic, and fall over. But you'd done it. You'd ridden a bicycle. Now you just had to do it consistently. Learning to ride took most people several hours to several days. Some naturals got it in an hour. Most people needed 3 to 5 hours of practice before they could ride straight for any distance. Some people struggled for days or weeks. The variability was frustrating. You'd see someone pick it up immediately while you'd been falling for 3 days straight. Age mattered. Younger people learned faster than older people. Physical fitness mattered. Athletic people learned faster than sedentary people. Many people learned without professional instruction, either because they couldn't afford it or because riding schools didn't exist in their town. These self-taught cyclists learned through trial and error in empty lots, quiet streets, or parks. The process was painful. You'd mount the bicycle, pedal frantically, wobble, lose control, and crash. Then repeat, and repeat, and repeat. Your shins got bruised from pedals hitting them. Your hands got scraped from breaking falls. Your pride got demolished from the sheer indignity of being a grown adult who couldn't ride a child's toy. Falling was inevitable and varied in severity. Minor falls meant scraping your hands and knees. Medium falls meant bruising your hips and shoulders. Major falls meant serious injuries, broken wrists from trying to break your fall, broken collarbones from landing on your shoulder, head injuries from hitting the ground or getting kicked by your own bicycle. Victorian clothing made falls worse. Long skirts tangled in the chain or wheels. High collars and tight sleeves restricted movement, making it harder to catch yourself. Women faced additional challenges learning to ride. Victorian propriety said women should be graceful and composed at all times. Learning to ride a bicycle was neither graceful nor composed. It was sweaty, awkward, and involved falling on your face repeatedly. Women who learned to ride had to overcome not just the physical challenge, but also the social embarrassment of looking foolish in public. Many women learned in private areas or at women-only riding schools to avoid male spectators who might mock them. The clothing problem was severe for women. Long skirts caught in chains and wheels, causing falls and sometimes serious injuries if the skirt pulled the rider off the bicycle. The solution was divided skirts, shortened skirts, or bloomers. But wearing these in public was socially controversial. Some women wore regular skirts while learning, accepted the difficulties, and just dealt with it. Others wore practical clothing and endured the scandalized reactions. It was a no-win situation. Children learned faster than adults, as they do with most physical skills. Kids had less fear, recovered from falls better, and their smaller size made the bicycles more manageable. By the late 1892, children's bicycles were available, and kids as young as 8 to 10 were learning to ride. They'd teach each other, with older siblings instructing younger ones. Within a generation, learning to ride became a childhood milestone rather than an adult challenge. Steering was its own challenge. The handlebars controlled the front wheel, but the steering response was sensitive. Oversteer, and you'd veer sharply and fall. Understeer, and you'd run into obstacles. You had to develop a feel for subtle steering inputs. Many new riders gripped the handlebars rigidly, which made steering worse. Experienced riders learned to steer with gentle pressure, keeping their upper body relaxed. This took practice and trust. Braking required learning too. The coaster brake, activated by pedaling backward, was intuitive but had a delay. You'd pedal backward, nothing would happen for a moment, then the brake would engage, sometimes too forcefully. Rod brakes, a lever on the handlebars that pressed a pad against the wheel, required hand strength and coordination. Stopping quickly without going over the handlebars required practice. Many new riders learned braking through painful trial and error. Starting from a stop was surprisingly difficult. You couldn't balance while stationary, so you had to push off, get both feet on the pedals quickly, and start pedaling before you tipped over. This required coordination and confidence. Many beginners wobbled wildly when starting, overcorrected, and fell sideways. Learning to start smoothly took as long as learning to ride straight. Turning was advanced technique. You couldn't just turn the handlebars like a car. You had to lean into the turn while steering, balancing centrifugal force against gravity. Turn too sharply without leaning, and the bicycle would slide out from under you. Lean too much without turning, and you'd fall over. The coordination required was complex and took time to develop. Many riders could go straight but panicked when trying to turn. By the late 1890s, learning to ride was easier because cycling infrastructure improved. Bicycle paths appeared in parks smooth, flat paths perfect for learning. Cycling clubs offered free lessons to recruit new members. More people knew how to ride, so informal instruction from friends and family became common. The knowledge base accumulated and spread, but learning still required overcoming fear, enduring falls, and persisting through frustration. The people who gave up, and many did usually quit because of fear after a bad fall, because the learning process was too frustrating, or because social pressure made them self-conscious about looking foolish. Those who persisted were rewarded with a skill that provided transportation, recreation, and independence. But that reward came at the cost of bruised egos, scraped knees, and the humbling experience of being terrible at something that looked easy when other people did it. Learning to ride a bicycle in the 1890 seconds was a rite of passage. If you could master it, you joined the ranks of modern, mobile people. If you couldn't, you watched from the sidelines as everyone else rode past. The stakes were higher than just learning a skill. You were proving to yourself and others that you could adapt to new technology, overcome physical challenges, and embrace modernity. And all it cost was your dignity and several weeks of falling on your face. Chapter 6. The Bicycle Suit. Fashion meets catastrophe. Victorian fashion was not designed for bicycles. Women wore floor-length skirts with multiple petticoats, corsets that restricted breathing, huge hats pinned to elaborate hairstyles, and sometimes bustles that added 3 feet of fabric to their backsides. Now imagine trying to ride a bicycle in all that. The skirt would tangle in the chain, the corset would make breathing impossible during exertion, and the hat would fly off after the first breeze. Something had to change. Enter bloomers. These were knee-length pants that women wore under shortened skirts. They were practical. They were also considered shockingly immodest and morally dangerous. Women who wore them in public faced harassment, ridicule, and moral panic. Let's start with what women were actually wearing in the 1890 seconds, because it's important to understand the scale of the problem. A properly dressed Victorian woman wore, from the inside out, a chemise, undershirt, drawers, underpants, a corset cover, multiple petticoats, at least 3 to 4 layers, a skirt that reached the floor and often dragged behind, a shirtwaist, blouse, possibly a jacket, stockings held up with garters, boots that laced up, and a hat pinned to an elaborate updo with multiple hat pins. This outfit weighed 10 to 15 pounds. It restricted movement in every direction, and it was completely incompatible with riding a bicycle. The skirt was the primary problem. Floor-length skirts dragged on the ground, which was fine when you were walking slowly and majestically like a proper Victorian lady. When you were trying to pedal a bicycle, the fabric would catch in the chain, wrap around the pedals, or get tangled in the rear wheel. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. A skirt caught in the chain could lock up the bicycle, causing a crash. Women had died from skirts tangling in bicycle mechanisms, being thrown from their bikes, and hitting their heads on the road. The corset was the second problem. Victorian corsets were designed to create an hourglass figure by compressing the waist and pushing the bust up. They were laced tight, often so tight that women couldn't breathe deeply. This was uncomfortable but tolerable when you were sitting in a parlour. When you were cycling and needed full lung capacity, the corset was torture. You'd gasp for air, feeling like you were suffocating while trying to pedal. Many women loosened their corsets for cycling, which was considered scandalous. A properly laced corset was a sign of respectability and moral character. The hat situation was almost comical. Victorian women wore elaborate hats pinned to their hair with long hat pins. These hats were designed to look impressive while sitting still. The moment you started cycling and encountered wind, the hat wanted to fly off. Women pinned them more securely, which helped until you hit a bump, and the jostling dislodged the hat anyway. Some women gave up on hats entirely when cycling, wearing just a cap or going bareheaded, which was considered immodest and lower class. The bustles and petticoats added bulk that made mounting a bicycle difficult. You had to somehow swing your leg over the frame while wearing layers of fabric. The dropped frame lady's bicycle helped it had a lower top tube that you could step through, but it didn't solve the fabric volume problem. Women still had to manage yards of material while trying to balance on a bicycle. The early solution was to simply shorten the skirt. Instead of floor length, make it ankle length. This was controversial. Showing your ankles was considered provocative, but it was less provocative than dying in a bicycle accident, so women started wearing shorter skirts for cycling. This caused pearl clutching among conservative social critics, who worried that shorter skirts would lead to moral degradation. Spoiler, they didn't. But shortened skirts still weren't enough. You needed something that wouldn't tangle in the machinery. Enter the divided skirt, or cycling skirt, a garment that looked like a skirt from the front but was actually split into two leg sections, like very wide pants. This allowed freedom of movement while maintaining the appearance of a skirt, which was important for women who didn't want to be harassed for wearing pants. Then came bloomers, named after Amelia Bloomer, who promoted them in the 1,850 seconds. Bloomers were baggy pants gathered at the knee, worn under a shortened skirt that fell to just below the knee. They looked like Turkish or Persian pants, exotic and vaguely orientalist in the Victorian imagination. They were practical for cycling because the leg division allowed free movement and nothing dangled to catch in the machinery. Bloomers were also controversial as hell. Wearing pants, even under a skirt, was seen as women claiming masculine privileges. Critics called bloomer wearers mannish and unwomanly. Newspaper cartoons mocked them. Men harassed women wearing bloomers on the streets, yelling insults, throwing things, physically blocking their path. Some establishments refused service to women in bloomers. The controversy was intense and sustained. The objections weren't really about fashion. They were about gender roles and social control. Pants represented male freedom of movement. Women wearing pants symbolized women claiming that same freedom. The bicycle plus bloomers meant women could go wherever they wanted, independently, without the restricting clothing that marked them as properly feminine and controlled. This terrified social conservatives who saw women's mobility as a threat to traditional family structures. Despite the backlash, many women wore bloomers anyway because they were practical and safe. Women who cycled regularly couldn't afford the risk and inconvenience of traditional skirts. They chose practicality over social approval. This was a radical act in the 1,890 seconds women prioritizing their own comfort and safety over male approval. The bicycle was enabling women to make independent choices about their own bodies and clothing. Fashion magazines and cycling publications promoted rational dress for cycling clothing designed for function rather than fashion. They published patterns for cycling skirts and bloomers. They featured illustrations of stylishly dressed women on bicycles, trying to make cycling clothing look fashionable and respectable. Some worked, some didn't, but the conversation shifted. By the late 1,890 seconds, seeing women in cycling clothes was common enough that it no longer caused riots. Men's cycling fashion was less controversial, but still required adaptations. You couldn't cycle in a formal suit with tails. Men adopted knickerbockers pants that ended just below the knee, worn with long socks and shorter jackets. This was acceptable because men's clothing was already more practical. Men also wore caps instead of formal hats, which was fine. Male headwear was less elaborate to begin with. The cycling suit for men became standard. Knickerbockers, short jacket, cap, and often a necktie to maintain some formality. But men's cycling fashion still marked you. Showing up to work in knickerbockers was not acceptable in most white-collar jobs. You had to change into business attire after arriving. Some workplaces had changing rooms. Others didn't, which meant you changed in a bathroom or behind a screen in your office. The cycling commuter had to manage 2 wardrobes, cycling clothes and work clothes, adding complexity and expense. The cycling shoe became a thing. Regular shoes had smooth leather soles that slipped on pedals. Cycling shoes had rubber soles for grip, and later cleated soles that locked into the pedals. These were sport-specific footwear, which was novel in the 1,890 seconds. Most people owned 1 or 2 pairs of shoes total. Buying special shoes just for cycling was a luxury many couldn't afford. The whole fashion situation created a cycling costume industry. Manufacturers produced cycling skirts, bloomers, knickerbockers, caps, and accessories specifically for cyclists. Department stores opened cycling departments. Catalogue companies sold cycling clothing through mail order. It was a significant market. Everyone who cycled needed appropriate clothing. And millions of people were cycling by the mid-1,890 seconds. By 1900, cycling fashion had largely normalized. Women in cycling skirts, or even bloomers, were common enough that they rarely attracted harassment. Men in knickerbockers were standard. The bicycle had forced fashion to become more practical, and fashion had adapted. But the transition period 1,893 to 1,897 was contentious, with women bearing the brunt of social criticism for daring to wear clothing that allowed them to ride bicycles safely. The bicycle and bloomers became symbols of women's liberation. Susan B. Anthony said the bicycle did more to emancipate women than anything else. Part of that emancipation was the freedom to wear practical clothing without asking male permission. The bloomer controversy was about much more than pants. It was about who controlled women's bodies and choices. And slowly, grudgingly, the answer shifted toward women controlling themselves. Fashion would never be the same. The bicycle proved that women's clothing could be practical and functional. Once that door opened, it couldn't be closed. The next generation of women would wear shorter skirts, simpler silhouettes, and eventually pants as everyday clothing. The bicycle started that revolution, one controversial bloomer at a time. Chapter 7. The Bloomers Controversy. Bloomers' loose pants gathered at the knee became the symbol of the new woman cyclist. They were practical for cycling. They were also deeply controversial. Men wrote outraged newspaper editorials about women wearing pants. Clergy preached against them. Women who wore bloomers in public were harassed, refused service in shops, and sometimes physically assaulted. The objection wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. Women wearing pants was seen as women claiming male privileges, independence, mobility, freedom from male oversight. The bicycle was liberating women, and bloomers were the visible symbol of that liberation. Society was not happy about it. Let's dig into why bloomers caused such intense backlash. In Victorian society, clothing was deeply gendered and carried moral significance. Men wore pants. Women wore skirts. This distinction was considered natural, God-ordained, and essential to maintaining social order. Pants represented masculine authority and freedom of movement. Skirts represented feminine modesty and restriction. The clothing difference reinforced gender hierarchy. Men had mobility and power. Women had constraint and dependence. When women started wearing bloomers for cycling, they were crossing a fundamental boundary. They were claiming a masculine privilege, freedom of movement, and doing it visibly, publicly, on city streets. This was read as a challenge to male authority. If women could wear pants, what else might they claim? Voting rights? Property rights? Equal access to education and employment? The bloomer was a thin edge of a revolutionary wedge, and conservative forces recognized it as such. The religious objections were intense. Clergy cited Deuteronomy 22:5. A woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, as biblical prohibition against women wearing pants. Sermons condemned bloomers as sinful, immodest, and contrary to God's design for gender. Ministers warned that women who wore bloomers were inviting moral degradation and divine punishment. Some churches refused admission to women wearing bloomers. The religious establishment mobilized against what it saw as women's rebellion against divinely ordained gender roles. Newspaper editorials were vicious. Male journalists wrote columns ridiculing bloomer wearers as ugly, unfeminine, and desperate for male attention they couldn't get by normal means. Political cartoons depicted bloomer wearers as mannish, aggressive, and unattractive. The message was clear. Women who wore bloomers had failed at being proper women and were pathetically trying to be men. The mockery was designed to shame women back into traditional clothing. Street harassment was common and sometimes violent. Men would shout insults at women, wearing bloomers, bloomer girl, bifurcated woman, worse things. They'd throw objects, rotten vegetables, mud, stones. They'd physically block women's paths, forcing them to dismount and walk their bicycles. Some men would grab at the bloomer fabric, trying to tear it or expose the woman's legs. The harassment was coordinated and sustained, not random individuals but groups of men who saw themselves as defending public decency. Women responded to this harassment in various ways. Some stopped wearing bloomers, deciding the social cost was too high. Others doubled down, wearing bloomers defiantly and refusing to be intimidated. Some carried hat pins or other implements for self-defense. Women's cycling clubs organized group rides where safety in numbers reduced harassment. They advocated for police protection. With mixed results, some police departments sympathized with the harassers. The media sensationalized bloomer-related incidents. Every time a woman wearing bloomers was involved in an accident, scandal, or crime, newspapers emphasized the bloomers. Bloomer-clad woman arrested was a headline designed to link bloomers with impropriety. The coverage created moral panic. Bloomers were associated with disorder, violence, and social breakdown. This was propaganda, but effective propaganda. Public opinion turned against bloomers. Businesses and institutions instituted anti-bloomer policies. Some restaurants refused to serve women in bloomers. Some hotels wouldn't accommodate them. Some parks banned them. These policies weren't legally enforceable, but businesses could refuse service, and they did. Women in bloomers found themselves excluded from public spaces, which reinforced the message: wear traditional clothing or face exclusion from society. The controversy peaked around 1895 to 1896. This was when the bicycle craze was at its height and bloomer wearing was most visible. The backlash was intense but not universal. Urban areas were more tolerant than rural areas. Younger people were more accepting than older generations. Progressive communities saw bloomers as practical rather than scandalous. But the controversy was real and widespread enough to affect millions of women's choices about clothing. Some women found middle ground. with divided skirts garments that looked like skirts but had separated legs inside. These provided the practical benefits of bloomers while appearing more conventional. Divided skirts were more socially acceptable because they maintained the appearance of a skirt, even though functionally they were pants. This compromise allowed women to cycle safely without facing the full force of social disapproval. The cycling industry tried to navigate the controversy. Bicycle manufacturers wanted women customers, but didn't want to alienate conservative men who bought bicycles for their wives and daughters. Advertisements showed women on bicycles, but usually in traditional skirts or very modest divided skirts. Manufacturers produced ladies' bicycles with dropped frames specifically to accommodate skirts. They tried to make cycling respectable and feminine, downplaying the association with bloomers and women's liberation. But the association couldn't be downplayed because it was real. The bicycle did enable women's independence. Bloomers were practical, necessary clothing for safe cycling. Women who cycled regularly wore bloomers despite social pressure. The bicycle was changing gender relations, and bloomers were the visible marker of that change. Trying to separate the bicycle from women's liberation was impossible because they were fundamentally connected. The medical establishment added their voices, mostly opposing bloomers. Some doctors claimed that wearing pants would damage women's reproductive systems, the same doctors who claimed that cycling itself caused uterine damage. Other doctors argued that bloomers would make women's legs too muscular and unfeminine. These claims were based on ideology, not medicine, but they added pseudo-scientific authority to the moral panic around bloomers. A few progressive doctors defended bloomers as healthier than corsets and restrictive skirts. They pointed out that traditional women's clothing caused real medical problems, fainting from tight corsets, tripping on long skirts, restricted breathing. Bloomers were objectively better for women's health. But these voices were minority views. The medical mainstream sided with social conservatism. Women's rights activists embraced bloomers as a symbol. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a leading suffragist, wore bloomers and encouraged other women to do the same. She connected dress reform to broader questions of women's autonomy and political rights. If women couldn't even choose their own clothing, how could they claim the right to vote or own property? The bloomer controversy became part of the larger women's rights movement. The controversy gradually faded after 1900, not because society became suddenly enlightened, but because bloomers became common enough to normalize. Millions of women wore them for cycling and outdoor activities. The shock wore off. New controversies emerged. Votes for women, women entering professions, women's education, and bloomers seemed less threatening by comparison. The bicycle craze declined as automobiles emerged, reducing the visibility of cycling clothing. But the impact lasted. Bloomers demonstrated that women could challenge clothing norms and survive the backlash. They established the precedent that women's clothing could be practical rather than purely decorative. They proved that social norms could change when enough women insisted on change. The next generation of women would wear shorter skirts, looser clothing, and eventually pants as everyday wear. The path to that future ran through the bloomer controversy of the 1,890 seconds. The bloomers controversy wasn't really about pants. It was about power, control, and who got to decide how women lived. Conservative forces saw women's independence as threatening and tried to enforce compliance through harassment and social pressure. Progressive women refused to comply and claimed their right to practical clothing and independent movement. It was a small battle in a larger war for women's rights. And the women wearing bloomers, cycling through harassment and ridicule, were winning, one pedal stroke at a time. Chapter 8. Roads in the 1,890 seconds. The roads in the 890 were not designed for bicycles. They were designed for horses and carriages, which meant they were mostly dirt, sometimes cobblestone, and universally terrible. Dirt roads became mud pits when it rained. Cobblestones were jagged and uneven. There were rocks, potholes, and horse manure everywhere. Lots of horse manure. Cities had thousands of horses producing tons of manure daily, and all of it ended up on the streets. You're cycling through what is essentially an obstacle course made of rocks and feces. Your tyres are pneumatic but thin. Your suspension is non-existent. Every bump is transmitted directly to your spine. Let's start with the dirt roads, which were the majority of roads in America in the 1,890. Even in cities, many streets were unpaved. In rural areas, basically everything was dirt. These weren't smooth, graded dirt roads like you might find in a modern park. They were packed earth that had been worn down by traffic horses, wagons, pedestrians creating ruts, depressions, and uneven surfaces. When it was dry, dirt roads were dusty. Horses and wagons kicked up clouds of dust that coated everything. You're cycling through this dust, breathing it, feeling it settle on your skin and clothes. The dust gets in your eyes, making vision difficult. It gets in your mouth and throat, making breathing unpleasant. By the time you reach your destination, you're coated in a layer of fine dirt. There's no shower waiting for you. You brush off what you can and accept that you'll be dirty for the rest of the day. When it rained, dirt roads became nightmares. The packed earth turned to mud, thick, sticky mud that clung to your bicycle wheels and made pedaling nearly impossible. Your wheels would sink into the mud, requiring enormous effort to move forward. The mud would clog your wheel spokes and chain, eventually seizing up the bicycle entirely. You'd have to stop, clear the mud manually, and continue. Some mud patches were so deep that cycling was impossible. You had to dismount and walk your bicycle, sinking ankle deep with each step. The ruts were particularly dangerous. Wagon wheels created deep grooves in the road. When you encountered these ruts, your bicycle wheel would drop into the groove and become trapped. The groove was too narrow to maneuver in and too deep to easily escape. You'd either have to stop and lift your wheel out or risk being thrown from your bicycle when the wheel suddenly caught and stopped. Hitting ruts was a constant hazard that required vigilant attention to the road ahead. Cobblestone streets existed in wealthier urban areas and were considered an improvement over dirt. They weren't. Cobblestones were small stones fitted together to create a paved surface. The stones were uneven, poorly fitted, and shifted over time. Cycling on cobblestones was bone-jarring. Remember the bone shaker bicycles? They got that name partly from cobblestone streets. Even with pneumatic tyres, cobblestones transmitted every impact directly to your body. Your hands went numb from gripping handlebars that vibrated constantly. Your backside went numb from the pounding. Your teeth clattered together. The gaps between cobblestones were perfect for catching bicycle wheels. A thin wheel could slip between stones, causing sudden stops and crashes. You learned to pick your line carefully, avoiding loose stones and gaps. This required constant attention. You couldn't look around or daydream. Your eyes stayed on the road's surface, searching for hazards. Cycling on cobblestones was exhausting mentally as well as physically. Now, let's talk about horse manure, because it deserves its own paragraph. American cities in the 1,890 had hundreds of thousands of horses. New York City alone had an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 horses. Each horse produced 15 to 30 pounds of manure per day. Do the math. That's millions of pounds of manure daily, all deposited on city streets. There was no practical way to clean it all up. Street sweepers existed, but they couldn't keep pace. Manure accumulated in piles that dried, blew away as dust, or got ground into the pavement. You're cycling through this. Fresh manure is slippery, hit a pile, and your wheel might slide out from under you. Dried manure becomes dust that you breathe. The smell is constant and overwhelming, especially in summer when heat intensifies everything. Your bicycle wheels pick up manure and fling it onto your legs and back. There's no avoiding it. Every ride means arriving at your destination with manure on your clothing, on your bicycle, and probably on your face where dust settled. Potholes were everywhere. Constant traffic wore down road surfaces. Water collected in depressions, freezing in winter and expanding, creating larger holes. Cities attempted repairs but couldn't keep up. Potholes ranged from minor depressions to wheel-breaking craters. Hitting a pothole at speed could bend your wheel rim, break spokes, or throw you from the bicycle. Cyclists learned to watch for potholes obsessively, swerving around them, sometimes riding in unpredictable patterns that confused other road users. Debris was another constant hazard. Rocks, broken glass, nails, pieces of wood, dead animals all ended up on the streets. There were no street cleaning services adequate to the task. You'd be cycling along and suddenly there's a dead cat in your path, or a broken wagon wheel, or a pile of building materials. Debris caused punctures, nails and glass were particular problems. Pneumatic tyres were vulnerable. A single nail could deflate your tyre completely. You carried a patch kit and pump because flats were inevitable, not occasional. Railroad tracks cut across many city streets. The tracks were steel rails set into the road surface, creating grooves parallel to the track. If your wheel fell into the groove, you were trapped. The groove was too narrow to turn out of and too smooth to gain traction. Your only option was to stop, lift your wheel out, and continue. Or you'd try to cross the tracks at an angle which required precise timing and balance. Many cyclists crashed trying to navigate railroad tracks. Streetcar tracks were similar problems. The grooves created by the tracks were wheel traps, but streetcar tracks were more dangerous because streetcars actually used them. You'd be cycling along a streetcar track because it was smoother than the surrounding road, and suddenly a streetcar would appear behind you, ringing its bell frantically. You'd have to exit the track quickly, often while the streetcar was nearly on top of you. Streetcar conductors hated cyclists. Cyclists hated streetcars. The streets weren't wide enough for both. In rural areas, roads were even worse. Graded roads were rare. Most were just worn paths through countryside. Rocks, roots, and stumps protruded from the surface. Hills were steep, no gentle grading or switchbacks. Bridges were narrow wooden structures that were terrifying to cross. The roads might wash out entirely during storms, leaving gaps or requiring long detours. Rural cycling was adventure and ordeal combined. Maintenance was non-existent in most places. Roads were public infrastructure but chronically underfunded. Cities spent minimal amounts on road upkeep. Rural roads received almost no maintenance. Roads deteriorated year after year, getting worse, not better. The expectation was that roads were naturally bad and nothing could be done about it. This was accepted reality until cyclists started demanding better. Cyclists became the first organised advocates for road improvement. The League of American Wheelmen launched the Good Roads movement in the 1892, lobbying governments to invest in road infrastructure. They published maps showing road conditions. They pressured local governments to grade and maintain roads. They advocated for paved roads and professional road engineering. This advocacy eventually led to improved roads, but in the 1892, the roads were still terrible. The irony is that improved roads, funded partly by cyclist advocacy, enabled automobiles to replace bicycles as dominant transportation. Cyclists paved the way literally for the cars that would make bicycles less popular. but that's later. In the 1,890 seconds, cyclists were just trying to ride on roads that weren't actively trying to kill them. Every ride was an obstacle course. You navigated manure, potholes, ruts, cobblestones, debris, railroad tracks, and general terrible road conditions. You arrived at destinations dirty, exhausted, and often with a flat tire needing repair. The bicycle was wonderful, the roads were hell, and the combination made cycling in the 1,890 seconds an adventure every single time you left your house. The roads were not your friend, they were your enemy, your challenge, and your constant source of frustration. But you rode anyway, because the bicycle was freedom. Even freedom through hell was better than no freedom at all. Chapter 9. Traffic, Horses, Streetcars, and Chaos. The streets in the 1,890 seconds are shared by horses, horse-drawn carriages, streetcars, pedestrians, and now bicycles. There are no traffic laws governing bicycles because they're too new. No bike lanes, no right-of-way rules, just chaos. Horses spook at bicycles because bicycles are strange and fast. Carriage drivers yell at cyclists for being in the way. Streetcar conductors ring bells furiously. Pedestrians step into the street without looking because they're used to slow-moving horses, not cyclists going 12 miles per hour. Accidents are common. People die regularly. The bicycle is wonderful until you have to navigate traffic that has no idea you exist. Let's paint the picture of what traffic looked like in the 1,890 seconds. The streets are crowded, but not with cars, with horses. Horses pulling delivery wagons, carriages, streetcars, and individual riders on horseback. A busy city street might have dozens of horses visible at any moment. They move slowly, walking or trotting, maybe 4 to 8 miles per hour. Everyone is used to this pace. Traffic moves at horse speed, which is predictable and manageable. Then bicycles appear, moving at 10-15 miles per hour, nearly twice as fast as horses. Cyclists weave between slower traffic, appearing suddenly, passing on either side. From a horse's perspective, this is alarming. Horses are prey animals with strong flight instincts. A bicycle appearing quickly from behind triggers their fear response. They shy, rear, or bolt. The carriage driver loses control. The carriage might crash. The horse might injure itself or others. This happens constantly in the early days of bicycles. Carriage drivers blame cyclists for spooking their horses. And they're not entirely wrong. Bicycles are startling to horses. But cyclists argue they have as much right to use the roads as anyone else. There's no legal framework to resolve this conflict. The roads are public, bicycles are legal, but there are no rules governing how bicycles and horses should interact. So everyone makes it up as they go, usually by yelling at each other. The passing problem is constant. You're on a bicycle, travelling faster than horse traffic. You want to pass, but the streets are narrow, maybe 20 to 30 feet wide, with traffic going both directions. Passing requires moving into the opposing lane, hoping nothing is coming the other way, overtaking the horse and carriage, and moving back into your lane. It's dangerous, requires judgment and timing, and often fails. You misjudge the distance, and suddenly you're stuck beside a horse that's sidestepping away from you while a wagon comes at you from the opposite direction. Streetcars are another hazard. These are large, heavy vehicles pulled by horses, or in some cities by the mid-1,890 seconds, powered by electricity. They run on fixed tracks embedded in the street. They move slowly but inexorably. Once a streetcar is moving, it takes significant distance to stop. The tracks create smooth paths that cyclists love to ride on because they're smoother than the surrounding road. But sharing tracks with streetcars is asking for trouble. You're cycling along the streetcar track, enjoying the smooth ride. Behind you, A streetcar approaches. The conductor rings the bell, a loud, insistent clanging. You're supposed to get off the track, but getting off requires maneuvering your wheel out of the track groove, which is difficult at speed. You wobble, struggling to exit the track while the streetcar bears down on you. Bell still ringing. If you don't exit in time, the streetcar will hit you. Conductors can't stop quickly. Your only option is to get out of the way. Streetcar bicycle accidents are common and often fatal. Pedestrians are a constant problem. In the 1,890 seconds, pedestrians are used to crossing streets whenever and wherever they want. Traffic is slow enough to avoid, but bicycles are faster and quieter than horses. Pedestrians don't hear you coming. They step into the street without looking, directly into your path. You ring your bell frantically. They look up, startled, often freezing in place instead of moving. You swerve around them, shouting warnings. They shout back, angry that you nearly hit them. Whose fault is it? No one knows. There are no crosswalk laws or pedestrian signals. Children are particularly unpredictable. They run into streets, chasing balls or each other. They don't understand bicycle speed or danger. You're constantly alert for children darting between parked wagons. Hitting a child would be catastrophic, morally, legally, and practically. You slow down in residential areas, watching for small humans who might suddenly appear, but you can't always avoid them. Child injuries from bicycles are reported regularly in newspapers, fueling anti-bicycle sentiment. Dogs are everywhere strays, and pets alike. They're not leashed, they roam freely. Some chase bicycles, barking and snapping at your wheels. A dog catching your wheel can cause a crash. You kick at dogs to keep them away, which angers the owners if they're present. Dogs also cause horse spookings. A dog barking at a bicycle causes the bicycle to swerve, which startles a horse, which causes a carriage accident. The cascade effects are unpredictable. There are no traffic signals, no stop signs, no yield signs. Intersections are free for alls. Multiple streams of traffic, horses, carriages, streetcars, bicycles, pedestrians, all converge with no one in charge. Priority is determined by assertiveness, size, and luck. Streetcars have de facto priority because they can't stop quickly. Carriages have priority over bicycles because they're bigger. Bicycles have priority over pedestrians because they're faster. But none of this is official. It's just emergent behavior that sometimes works and sometimes results in crashes. Right-of-way conflicts happen constantly. You're cycling straight and a carriage turns across your path without warning. There are no turn signals. The driver just turns. You brake frantically or swerve. Sometimes you collide. Sometimes you shout at the driver. Sometimes they shout back. Sometimes police get involved, but they usually just tell everyone to be more careful and leave. There's no enforcement mechanism because there are no rules to enforce. Night cycling is particularly dangerous. Your bicycle has a kerosene lamp attached to the handlebars. It provides minimal light enough to see a few feet ahead, not enough to illuminate the road properly. Other road users also have minimal lighting. Carriages have lamps, streetcars have lamps, but none of it is adequate. You're navigating in near darkness, avoiding obstacles you can barely see. Night accidents are common. Some cities ban cycling after dark. Others just accept the casualties as inevitable. Weather makes everything worse. Rain makes roads muddy and slippery. Visibility drops. Stopping distances increase. Your kerosene lamp might blow out in the wind. You're navigating by feel as much as sight. Snow is even worse. Roads become impassable. Ice makes cycling nearly impossible. But people cycle anyway. because they need transportation. The accidents accumulate. Police try to manage traffic, but they're overwhelmed. There aren't enough officers. There are no clear rules to enforce. Police mainly respond to accidents after they happen, taking reports and occasionally making arrests if someone was egregiously reckless. Some police departments issue regulations. Maximum speed limits for bicycles, usually 8 to 10 miles per hour in cities. Requirements to ring bells when passing. Prohibitions on cycling on sidewalks. These are sporadically enforced at best. The chaos creates conflict between different road users. Carriage drivers hate cyclists. Cyclists hate carriage drivers. Everyone hates streetcar conductors. Pedestrians hate everyone. Newspaper editorials debate who has more right to the roads. Some argue bicycles should be banned from busy streets. Others argue roads are public and everyone has equal access. The debate is never resolved. The chaos continues. Cyclists develop defensive riding strategies. You assume everyone else will do something stupid. You watch for horses that might spook. You listen for streetcar bells. You scan for pedestrians who might step into your path. You position yourself to always have an escape route. You ride assertively, but not aggressively. You accept that near misses are normal and crashes are possible. It's exhausting mentally, maintaining this level of vigilance constantly. Despite everything, millions of people cycle successfully. They learn the rhythms of traffic. They develop instincts for reading other road users' intentions. They memorize problem intersections and plan routes to avoid them. Cycling becomes a skill not just operating the bicycle, but navigating the chaos of 1,892 streets. Those who master it have a fast, flexible transportation option. Those who don't sometimes end up in accidents that get reported in newspapers as cautionary tales. The traffic chaos of the 1,890 seconds eventually leads to traffic regulations in the 1900s, 1,910 seconds. Stop signs, traffic lights, defined right-of-way rules, speed limits, all emerge partly in response to bicycle chaos and later automobile chaos. The 1,890 seconds are the wild west of urban traffic, a period when everything is being figured out through trial, error, and occasional fatalities. But that's later. Right now, in the 1,890 seconds, you're just trying to get across town without dying. The traffic is chaos. The rules don't exist. The other road users don't know how to share the road with you. And you're navigating all of it on a bicycle with marginal brakes and no protective equipment. Welcome to 1,890 seconds traffic. Try not to hit anyone, or get hit, or get run over by a streetcar, or spooked by a horse, or yelled at by literally everyone. Good luck out there. Chapter 10. The Social Divide. Who gets to cycle? Cycling in the 1,890 seconds is primarily a middle and upper class activity. Poor people can't afford $100 bicycles. Working class people can't afford the time to learn recreational cycling. Immigrants are too busy surviving. So the bicycle craze is largely white, middle class, and affluent. Cycling clubs form, but they're exclusive. Some clubs explicitly ban black members, Jewish members, working class members. The bicycle is sold as democratic, anyone can ride. But the reality is that economic and social barriers determine who actually gets access. The bicycle is freedom, but only for some people. Let's start with the economics. A decent bicycle costs $100 in 1895. The average working class wage is $400, $500 per year. That means a bicycle costs $2 25% of annual income. For someone earning $400 per year, spending $100 on a bicycle means sacrificing other necessities, food, rent, clothing. It's not a realistic purchase. The bicycle is financially out of reach for the working class. And that's before considering the additional costs of maintenance, appropriate clothing, and accessories. Even if a working class person could save enough to buy a bicycle, they often lack the time to use it. Factory workers put in 10 to 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Sunday is the only day off, and it's expected to be spent at church or with family. When do you have time for recreational cycling? When do you have energy after exhausting physical labor? The bicycle is a leisure activity that requires leisure time, which working class people don't have. The poor are completely excluded. Someone earning $200 per year can barely afford food and shelter. A $100 bicycle is as unreachable as the moon. The used bicycle market helps. Marginally used bikes might cost $30.50, but even that is several months of wages for a poor person. And poor people need that money for survival, not recreation. The bicycle craze passes them by entirely. Immigrants face additional barriers. Many are poor and working class, which creates the same economic exclusion. But there are also cultural and language barriers. Cycling clubs are English-speaking, middle-class social organizations. An Italian or Polish immigrant working in a factory doesn't fit that world. Even if they could afford a bicycle, they're unlikely to be welcomed in cycling clubs or social rides. The bicycle craze is an American middle-class phenomenon that doesn't include immigrants. Race creates the most rigid barrier. Black Americans in the 1,890 seconds face systematic exclusion from cycling culture. Many cycling clubs explicitly ban black members. Advertisements show only white cyclists. Bicycle shops in some areas refuse to sell to black customers or provide inferior service. Black cyclists face harassment on the streets beyond what white cyclists experience, being run off roads, having their bicycles vandalized, facing violence for cycling in white neighborhoods. Despite these barriers, black Americans do cycle. Black-owned bicycle shops open in black neighborhoods. Black cycling clubs form in response to exclusion from white clubs. Black cyclists organize their own races and tours. Marshall Major Taylor becomes a champion bicycle racer, winning national and international competitions despite constant racism. But black participation in the bicycle craze is limited and contested. The bicycle is theoretically available to all, but racism ensures it's primarily a white activity. Jewish Americans face similar exclusion, though less violent. Many cycling clubs have policies excluding Jewish members. Social clubs were segregated by religion, and cycling clubs followed that pattern. Jewish cyclists form their own clubs. But the exclusion sends a message. Cycling is a Christian activity. Jews are tolerated as bicycle shop owners. Many bicycle merchants are Jewish, but not welcomed as social equals in cycling culture. Gender is its own barrier. Women can cycle, but they face different constraints. Proper women need appropriate clothing, cycling skirts, or bloomers, which cost money. Women can't cycle alone without risking their reputations in many communities. Women are discouraged from competitive cycling or long-distance touring. Women's cycling is supposed to be gentle, recreational, not athletic or ambitious. The bicycle offers women freedom, but that freedom is constrained by gender norms that don't apply to men. Class divisions appear within the cycling community itself. Working-class men who manage to afford bicycles join working-class cycling clubs. Middle-class cyclists join middle-class clubs. Upper-class cyclists join exclusive clubs. The clubs rarely mix. They organise separate rides, races, and social events. Class hierarchy is maintained even within cycling culture. A factory worker on a $50 used bicycle doesn't ride with a lawyer on a $150 racing bicycle. They inhabit different social worlds. The cycling clubs are explicitly class structured. The League of American Wheelmen is the largest cycling organisation, but membership requires paying dues and maintaining respectable social standing. Local clubs have membership committees that vet applicants. If you're the wrong class, race, religion, or gender, you're rejected. The clubs are gatekeepers, determining who gets to participate in organised cycling culture. The clubs control access to resources. They publish maps showing good cycling routes. They organise century runs, 100-mile rides, and tours. They lobby for road improvements. They provide social networks that lead to jobs and marriages. Being excluded from clubs means being excluded from these benefits. Poor people, minorities, and working-class people are locked out of cycling's social and economic benefits. There are exceptions. Some progressive cycling clubs welcome all races and classes. Some cities have working-class clubs that organise their own events and create their own culture. Some black clubs become prestigious within black communities, but these are exceptions. The dominant cycling culture is white, middle class, and exclusive. The bicycle is advertised as democratic technology. Marketing materials show bicycles as the people's vehicle, affordable to all, accessible to everyone. This is propaganda. The bicycle is accessible to people who can afford $100 plus ongoing costs, who have leisure time, who fit social norms of who belongs on bicycles. That's a minority of Americans in the 1,890 seconds. The irony is that the bicycle does democratize transportation, but only within the class that can already afford transportation. Middle-class people who previously needed horses or relied on streetcars can now cycle. This is genuine democratization. But it doesn't extend to the working class or poor, who still walk or cram into overcrowded streetcars. The bicycle creates mobility within the middle class without addressing the immobility of the poor. The bicycle craze reshapes middle-class social life without touching working-class or poor communities. It's a middle-class phenomenon that gets remembered as a universal cultural moment because the people who write history are middle class. The historical narrative presents the bicycle craze as something everyone participated in, but millions of Americans never owned bicycles, never learned to ride, and watched the craze from outside, excluded by economics and social barriers. This pattern continues as automobiles replace bicycles. Cars are even more expensive and exclusive. The automobile era is even more class divided. The bicycle craze establishes the pattern. New transportation technology benefits those who can afford it, deepening inequality while being marketed as universal progress. For those inside the bicycle craze, the middle and upper classes, it's a golden age of mobility and freedom. For those outside the working class, the poor, racial minorities, it's another reminder of exclusion. The bicycle is wonderful. Access to the bicycle is limited, and those limitations are intentional, enforced through economics, social norms, and explicit discrimination. The bicycle craze isn't universal, it's selective, and understanding who's excluded is as important as understanding who's included. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your world of bike lanes and helmets and gears that actually work, take a moment to think about the cyclists of the 1,890 seconds, the ones who paid 3 months' wages for a steel contraption that might kill them, the ones who learned to ride by falling repeatedly on cobblestones and horse manure, the women who wore bloomers and endured harassment just to experience the freedom of going somewhere alone, the ones who navigated streets full of spooked horses, angry carriage drivers, and pedestrians who had no idea bicycles existed. Because here's the thing about the bicycle craze of the 1,890 seconds. It was simultaneously ridiculous and revolutionary. Ridiculous because people paid fortunes for machines that required learning a completely new skill on terrible roads in inappropriate clothing while everyone yelled at you. Revolutionary because despite all that, despite the cost and the danger and the social scandal and the traffic chaos, millions of people did it anyway. They learned to ride. They bought bicycles. They claimed their freedom on two wheels. The bicycle changed everything. It gave women independence they'd never had. Susan B. Anthony wasn't exaggerating when she said the bicycle did more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. Women could go places without male supervision. They could wear practical clothing. They could build physical strength and confidence. They could court without chaperones. The bicycle was a freedom machine, and women recognized it immediately. The bicycle changed men's lives too. It provided affordable personal transportation at a time when cities were growing and suburbs were emerging. It enabled commuting, recreation, adventure. It taught mechanical skills. It created social networks through cycling clubs. It made the middle class mobile in ways they'd never been before. The bicycle was practical freedom, the ability to go where you wanted, when you wanted, under your own power. The bicycle even changed the roads you drive on today. The Good Roads movement, started by cyclists who were tired of riding on terrible surfaces, lobbied for paved roads and professional road engineering. The improved roads they fought for eventually enabled automobiles. Cyclists literally paved the way for the cars that would replace them. There's irony in that, but there's also legacy. Every smooth road you drive on today exists partly because Victorian cyclists demanded better. The bicycle craze was also deeply flawed. It was exclusive, limited largely to white, middle-class people who could afford the cost and had the leisure time. Poor people, working-class people, racial minorities, and immigrants were largely excluded. The bicycle was freedom, but only for some. The craze reinforced social hierarchies even as it challenged gender norms. This tension between the bicycle's democratic promise and its exclusive reality shaped how the technology developed and who benefited from it. But even with its flaws, the bicycle craze demonstrated something important. Humans will enthusiastically adopt technology that increases their freedom and mobility, despite the expense, despite the danger, despite the terrible roads and the social scandal and the harassment. People bought bicycles by the millions. They wanted mobility. They wanted independence. They wanted to go fast under their own power. The bicycle delivered that, and nothing, not cost, not danger, not social pressure, could stop people from claiming it. The people who cycled in the 1,890 seconds were pioneers. They learned to ride when no one could teach them. They navigated traffic that had no rules. They wore clothing that caused scandals. They advocated for better roads. They formed clubs and organized races and mapped routes. They created the infrastructure and culture of cycling from scratch. They were figuring it out in real time, making mistakes, having accidents, but persisting anyway. And they did it without any of the things you take for granted. No helmets, no reflectors, no bike lanes, no traffic laws protecting them, no cycling computers or GPS, no online communities to share routes and tips. Just a bicycle, terrible roads, and determination. They were tougher than they look in those old photographs, those serious-faced Victorian people in formal clothing. They were adventurers, every single one of them. The bicycle craze didn't last forever. By 1900, the novelty had worn off. Bicycles became common, practical transportation rather than exciting new technology. And then automobiles appeared, promising even more speed and comfort and status. The wealthy abandoned bicycles for cars. The middle class aspired to cars. The bicycle became associated with children and people who couldn't afford automobiles. The craze ended not with a crash, but with the sound of an engine starting. But the impact lasted. The bicycle proved that personal transportation technology could rapidly transform society. It demonstrated that women could claim independence and mobility. It showed that people would organize and advocate for infrastructure improvements. It created the template for how new transportation technology gets adopted: initial enthusiasm, social disruption, infrastructure adaptation, and eventually normalization or replacement by something newer. The bicycle also taught lessons that we're still learning: that freedom of movement matters, that practical technology beats impractical fashion, that infrastructure shapes what's possible, that social barriers limit who benefits from progress, that humans are adaptable and courageous and willing to risk looking foolish for the sake of something better. So tonight, as you lie there in your comfortable bed with your electric lights and your central heating and your smartphone within arm's reach, remember the cyclists of the 1,890 seconds, the ones who paid a fortune to learn a new skill on terrible roads in ridiculous clothing while being harassed by horses and humans alike, the ones who claimed freedom one pedal stroke at a time, the ones who looked at a bicycle, an expensive, dangerous, socially controversial machine, and said, "Yes, I want that." They earned their rest, they earned their place in history, and they earned the gratitude of everyone who's ever ridden a bicycle since, because they were the ones who proved it could be done. They were the ones who made cycling normal, acceptable, and wonderful. The bicycle craze was brief, but its legacy is permanent. Every bike lane, every cycling path, every person who's ever felt the joy of riding fast under their own power, that's the inheritance from the 1,890 seconds. Cyclists who refuse to let cost or danger or social pressure stop them from experiencing freedom on two wheels. They were stubborn and hopeful and slightly ridiculous and absolutely magnificent. Just like humans have always been, just like humans always will be. So rest well tonight, sleep deeply, and tomorrow maybe take a bike ride. Not because you have to, but because you can. Because the technology is available, the roads are smooth, and the freedom is still there, waiting on two wheels. The cyclists of the 1,890 seconds would be proud, and probably jealous of your gears and helmet and bike lanes, and the fact that you don't have to dodge horse manure. Sweet dreams and happy cycling. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your world of bike lanes and helmets and gears that actually work, take a moment to think about the cyclists of the 1,890 seconds, the ones who paid 3 months' wages for a steel contraption that might kill them, the ones who learned to ride by falling repeatedly on cobblestones and horse manure, the women who wore bloomers and endured harassment just to experience the freedom of going somewhere alone, the ones who navigated streets full of spooked horses, angry carriage drivers, and pedestrians who had no idea bicycles existed. Because here's the thing about the bicycle craze of the 1,890 seconds. It was simultaneously ridiculous and revolutionary. Ridiculous because people paid fortunes for machines that required learning a completely new skill on terrible roads in inappropriate clothing while everyone yelled at you. Revolutionary because despite all that, despite the cost and the danger and the social scandal and the traffic chaos, millions of people did it anyway. They learned to ride. They bought bicycles. They claimed their freedom on two wheels. The bicycle changed everything. It gave women independence they'd never had. Susan B. Anthony wasn't exaggerating when she said the bicycle did more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. Women could go places without male supervision. They could wear practical clothing. They could build physical strength and confidence. They could court without chaperones. The bicycle was a freedom machine, and women recognized it immediately. The bicycle changed men's lives too. It provided affordable personal transportation at a time when cities were growing and suburbs were emerging. It enabled commuting, recreation, adventure. It taught mechanical skills. It created social networks through cycling clubs. It made the middle class mobile in ways they'd never been before. The bicycle was practical freedom, the ability to go where you wanted, when you wanted, under your own power. The bicycle even changed the roads you drive on today. The Good Roads movement, started by cyclists who were tired of riding on terrible surfaces, lobbied for paved roads and professional road engineering. The improved roads they fought for eventually enabled automobiles. Cyclists literally paved the way for the cars that would replace them. There's irony in that, but there's also legacy. Every smooth road you drive on today exists partly because Victorian cyclists demanded better. The bicycle craze was also deeply flawed. It was exclusive, limited largely to white, middle-class people who could afford the cost and had the leisure time. Poor people, working-class people, racial minorities, and immigrants were largely excluded. The bicycle was freedom, but only for some. The craze reinforced social hierarchies even as it challenged gender norms. This tension between the bicycle's democratic promise and its exclusive reality shaped how the technology developed and who benefited from it. But even with its flaws, the bicycle craze demonstrated something important. Humans will enthusiastically adopt technology that increases their freedom and mobility. Despite the expense, despite the danger, despite the terrible roads and the social scandal and the harassment, people bought bicycles by the millions. They wanted mobility. They wanted independence. They wanted to go fast under their own power. The bicycle delivered that, and nothing, not cost, not danger, not social pressure, could stop people from claiming it. The people who cycled in the 1,890 seconds were pioneers. They learned to ride when no one could teach them. They navigated traffic that had no rules. They wore clothing that caused scandals. They advocated for better roads. They formed clubs and organized races and mapped routes. They created the infrastructure and culture of cycling from scratch. They were figuring it out in real time, making mistakes, having accidents, but persisting anyway. And they did it without any of the things you take for granted. No helmets, no reflectors, no bike lanes, no traffic laws protecting them, no cycling computers or GPS, no online communities to share routes and tips. Just a bicycle, terrible roads, and determination. They were tougher than they look in those old photographs, those serious-faced Victorian people in formal clothing. They were adventurers, every single one of them. The bicycle craze didn't last forever. By 1900, the novelty had worn off. Bicycles became common, practical transportation rather than exciting new technology. And then automobiles appeared, promising even more speed and comfort and status. The wealthy abandoned bicycles for cars. The middle class aspired to cars. The bicycle became associated with children and people who couldn't afford automobiles. The craze ended not with a crash, but with the sound of an engine starting. But the impact lasted. The bicycle proved that personal transportation technology could rapidly transform society. It demonstrated that women could claim independence and mobility. It showed that people would organize and advocate for infrastructure improvements. It created the template for how new transportation technology gets adopted: initial enthusiasm, social disruption, infrastructure adaptation, and eventually normalization or replacement by something newer. The bicycle also taught lessons that we're still learning: that freedom of movement matters, that practical technology beats impractical fashion, that infrastructure shapes what's possible, that social barriers limit who benefits from progress, that humans are adaptable and courageous and willing to risk looking foolish for the sake of something better. So tonight, as you lie there in your comfortable bed with your electric lights and your central heating and your smartphone within arm's reach, remember the cyclists of the 1,890 seconds, the ones who paid a fortune to learn a new skill on terrible roads in ridiculous clothing while being harassed by horses and humans alike, the ones who claimed freedom one pedal stroke at a time, the ones who looked at a bicycle, an expensive, dangerous, socially controversial machine, and said, "Yes, I want that." They earned their rest, they earned their place in history, and they earned the gratitude of everyone who's ever ridden a bicycle since, because they were the ones who proved it could be done. They were the ones who made cycling normal, acceptable, and wonderful. The bicycle craze was brief, but its legacy is permanent. Every bike lane, every cycling path, every person who's ever felt the joy of riding fast under their own power, that's the inheritance from the 1,890 seconds. Cyclists who refuse to let cost or danger or social pressure stop them from experiencing freedom on two wheels. They were stubborn and hopeful and slightly ridiculous and absolutely magnificent. Just like humans have always been, just like humans always will be. So rest well tonight, sleep deeply, and tomorrow maybe take a bike ride. Not because you have to, but because you can. Because the technology is available, the roads are smooth, and the freedom is still there, waiting on two wheels. The cyclists of the 1,890 seconds would be proud, and probably jealous of your gears and helmet and bike lanes, and the fact that you don't have to dodge horse manure. Sweet dreams and happy cycling.